Hi, and welcome to Matthias's meetings. I'm Matthias, and this is Matthias. Thank you for being here, Matthias. Thank you for inviting me, Matthias. How are you doing? I'm doing well. How are you? Good. Do you mean you're doing well? Yeah, but you understood what I meant, so you're just trying to be a dick. No, I just want to have the correct thing out there. I get that, but what's correct in language, especially English, seems arbitrary, and language is constantly changing and evolving. Alright, I get that it's not entirely arbitrary. Yeah, I also get that having no rules doesn't work either, just sometimes you come across as an asshole when you correct people, no matter what the situation is. Cool. How are you doing now? Still good. Cool. What do you want to talk about? I figured we could talk about apathy and how it's valued. What do you mean? Like sometimes I go to 4chan or places. Why? I'm curious and it's there. It's interesting to see people interacting anonymously, how it shifts the tone. Anyway, it's like enthusiasm for anything other than violence or sex is stupid to them. Like apathy is the only thing of value and empathy makes you pathetic. Terms alpha and beta get thrown around a lot. People also just want to know how to ejaculate more when they climax and talk to strangers online about it, and they have actual tips that they exchange with one another. It's like that Pizzagate dude always talking about women creating a super serum. Yeah, I watched Dr. Strangelove recently, and there's that general who keeps saying that women want his life essence and he's paranoid about fluoride, so he authorizes a nuclear attack. I could see Pizza Dude being paranoid about fluoride. See a chemtrail conspiracist? Wouldn't be surprised. Me either. Yeah. It's a weird thing that I think ultimately boils down to not having anything to be proud of in personal accomplishments, so you announce the achievements of others and focus on not exactly a passing contest, but something very close. Did you see that study about big increases in white men committing suicide? Yeah, people use that in art as an argument to be anti-feminist, which doesn't make sense to me. Increases among men who were told they'd be able to support and survive a family with a high school diploma and were able to for a short period of time. The job market has shifted and manufacturing isn't a place to build a career that it once was in the US. Also, a lot more prescribed opioids that are an actual gateway drug. Suicide statistics are pointed out by the Milo dude a lot. Yeah. Every now and again I see a super compressed JPEG posted that's Milo talking about, is it Milo? I don't know. About how men have it more difficult because they're told they can't cry and have higher suicide rates and being drafted. It's the sort of thing that I'm glad I wasn't the right age and state of vulnerability when I first read it. It's the sort of thing that would have stuck with me when I was younger and felt isolated. I remember thinking that women had it easier, but it wasn't an actual perspective. It was mostly because I was horny and sex was like the main goal. It seemed like women were more likely to get that easily. Do you think Milo would be different if he had been born 20 or so years earlier? I think he would have either been closeted his whole life or radicalized against the Reagan administration, depending on how close he was to the AIDS epidemic and the blatant apathy from the US government. Hey, we're back to apathy. Yep. Speaking of apathy and Reagan, it's interesting how much more empathetic the language and general understanding of the heroin crisis is compared to the crack epidemic of the 80s. Like, not even from a political standpoint, but when someone says crackhead, it's a much different mental image and connotation than when you say something like junkie. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say something like, that guy's acting like he's on heroin, and it's been like a joke or something. I had to look it up. I was trying to figure out if maybe it has something to do with things being stimulants or depressants. Heroin is an opioid/narcotic, doesn't fall into either of those categories. I think it's more commonplace to have jokes mocking people who are using stimulants because there's more action happening and the people are more active, like meth or crack or cocaine, whereas depressants/narcotics have mostly people getting sleepy. What about alcohol and jokes about being drunk? I think it's more about alcohol being more commonly used and less about it being a depressant, so there's a different sort of familiarity and acceptance with it, like there are drunk cartoon characters in children's stuff. Maybe not explicitly, but definitely implied, like in Dumbo gets drunk. Yeah, it was kind of weird. It's also weird that they had the racist depictions of crows, and the main one is named Jim Crow. It's sort of like people being like, everyone's offended in 2016 or 17, can't not be offensive, so here's something I purposefully made offensive and will call you too sensitive if you respond. It's a weird dynamic to be sensitive about people being offended. Like it's a two-way street. You're actually being offended by the person being offended. You're just being a dick about it. Just looked it up. Jim Crow was a blackface character performed by Thomas D. Rice, and that's where the term Jim Crow laws comes from. Yeah. I always thought that it was the name of a lawmaker and never bothered to look it up. It must be weird to make a racist character that lives on in history as a term used for laws that enforce systematic oppression. Never heard of Thomas Rice, but I have heard of Jim Crow. I guess that's kind of better than having your actual name be the name of racist laws. This is jumping around, but do you think there's a modern tribalism defined by internet social groups? Kinda, like that question is more or less the answer. There's a definite circle jerk nature to how people consume news on the internet. It's definitely much more comforting to read articles that affirm your perspective. It's a lot of pop culture stuff on both sides when the narrative reaffirms either perspective. There's one guy I know from middle school who has been pro-Trump since the get-go, and I tried to engage with him a few times, but ultimately goes nowhere because we both have perspectives that are pretty solidly formed. Try to talk to find a balance point with people I disagree with. Like for gun control, I go for whether or not nuclear bombs are cool for private citizens to own, and then we both agree that there are weapons that pose too great a threat to other private citizens to be owned by a private citizen. But like, where is that line drawn? There's a lot of fear out there. Yeah, there's a lot of irrational fear. Like the greatest threat to Americans is heart disease as far as death's concerned, but something about that enacting slowly over a lifetime feels like it's less directly correlated with your actions, whereas stopping entire countries from having their citizens enter the country feels like a more absolute and less embarrassing action. Like heart disease is primarily something you cause yourself to suffer from, like you can kind of fix it on your own, but the big scary world out there isn't your fault and needs to be held accountable. The value of government being isolationism, despite the U.S. causing far more civilian deaths than any sovereign nation has ever perpetrated against the U.S. Anything else you want to say on apathy? There are people whose entire worldview is focused on video games and were apathetic to politics in full prior to Gamergate, and that's kind of insane to me. Like that women were getting involved in the industry made the people join up with white supremacist groups. The alt-right movement is more an expression of apathy than ignorance, which is the reason it's so much more sinister. Like, the whole adoption of Pepe was because it was stupid and mocking people who care about anything. It was just trying to have some weird subculture. I really fucking hate that mentality. Yeah. It's also weird how much of the alt-right culture is ultimately taken from queer and trans people. Yeah, there's the alt-right music genre that's basically shitty versions of Wendy Carlos music, and the Red Pill is from The Matrix, and then there's V for Vendetta, and both of those were written by the Wachowski sisters. You can also talk about Turing, and there's a lot of gay history of computer science as well. Yeah, it's a pretty narrow-minded view of the world. Fucking apathy. Thanks for being here, Matthias. You're welcome. Thanks for having me. You're welcome. Thanks for watching Matthias's meetings. Please like and subscribe.